Now that we know how to read in a data file and drive DOM changes from that data, it's time to explore drawing graphs. In this section, we will start with an HTML page that includes the Bootstrap CSS, a page-specific CSS file, the D3.js libraries, and a controller script to build our bar chart. The JavaScript controller page that we build will read in some data and bind that data to the DOM to drive the creation of a bar chart. Later, we'll add axes and animate the bars. Let's get started by opening the results.js file under the third section's directory. Once again, we have our controller divided into three parts: global variables, the reload function, and the redraw function. We call reload at the end to get things started. The width and height are for our drawing canvas, while the margin defines how much padding we have inside the canvas for our graph. In the previous section, we took a roster div and added a table to it. This time, we're going to take the div with ID of results and append an SVG element with width and height attributes. This is our canvas for drawing on. Our standard reload function initializes some data that is passed to our currently blank redraw function. We'll be filling these two functions in shortly. If you haven't done so, load the page in your browser. Now take a look at the DOM inspector. Open up the results div, then mouse over the SVG element. This should be 750 pixels wide by 300 pixels tall. Next, in the reload function, let's replace the code to read in the data from a CSV file and pass it on to the redraw function as is. Now it's time to dive into drawing the graph. In the redraw function, let's start by selecting all rect elements with the class of bar under the SVG element. This, as you well know, creates a virtual selection to which we bind our data. We'll then start the enter iterator for the virtual bars that don't exist yet and create rect elements with a class of bar. Next, we want to assign some attributes to each bar. So iterating through the bars, let's assign the X attribute to be the index of the current iteration. We'll then assign the width to be 5, just to see what happens. The Y attribute can be 0, since we usually start there. Then the height can be the number of goals scored for the current record. Save and reload. That's kind of hard to see. Let's zoom in. It looks like we have a couple of problems. First, there is scale. X is increasing by 1 pixel each time, but each bar is 5 pixels wide. Let's scale the X value by multiplying the index by 6, thus leaving a space in between each bar. Let's also scale the height by multiplying it by 50 and see what happens. The second issue is that SVG draws with its origin in the upper left-hand corner, so height actually draws downward. What we really need to do is set the Y attribute to the height of our graph, 300, minus the bottom margin, 20, minus the height of the bar. Save that and reload. Well, that's a little better. So what have we learned so far? First of all, loading a comma-separated value data file is practically identical to loading a tab-separated value data file. There should be no surprises there. Also, whether you've used SVG markup before or not, binding rectangles is the same as binding rows in a table. The actual drawing is just a matter of knowing a little math for scale and flipping the vertical coordinates, applying them top to bottom. But D3 offers us several other tools for improving our presentation, starting with scales. Next, let's see how we can use scales to have our histograms span the full width and height of our canvas, less margins, while mapping from our actual data values.